A cop punched a black nun convinced of her guilt. But after a few minutes, he realized he had made a mistake, the consequences of which were shocking. What really happened? Find out the whole truth and leave a comment from where you watch this video. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss other stories. The bus rolled to a stop in the quiet town, and Saraphina stepped out, her feet touching the dusty pavement of a place steeped in an air that was both peaceful and closed off. She carried a large bundle close to her chest, wrapped tightly in layers of cloth. As she gazed around, taking in the small-town buildings, the quiet streets, and the glances from the townsfolk, Saraphina understood that this wasn't going to be an easy task. Her attire, a traditional nun's habit covering her from head to toe except for her face, seemed to make her stand out even more in the crowd. Her dark skin and serene expression contrasted sharply against the curious and sometimes cold stares she received. She felt the weight of the town's quiet judgment bearing down on her, yet she kept her gaze forward, unbothered by it, holding to the purpose that had brought her here. As she walked, memories began to surface. The small chapel where she had first received her calling, the faces of the children she had cared for in the orphanage, and the quiet strength of the sisters who had shown her the power of service. Today, she was here on a mission to deliver a large sum of money to the town's struggling shelter. This shelter, she knew, had become a beacon of hope for the people who had nowhere else to go. If it closed down, as it was rumored to be close to doing, many would be left without shelter or support. The money in her hands wasn't simply cash. It was a lifeline. It had been gathered by her community, penny by penny, from people who believed in her cause and wanted to help. Saraphina had prayed over this bundle, understanding that it symbolized not just monetary aid, but an act of faith, a chance for this town to see what compassion looked like. As she moved further into town, she noticed more and more people stopping to look at her, some with open curiosity, others with suspicion. She kept her pace steady and her eyes gentle. This wasn't the first time she had faced such a reaction, and it wouldn't be the last. She knew that her calling wasn't about comfort. It was about endurance, resilience, and kindness in the face of hardship. And right now, all she needed was to deliver the money to the shelter. Just as she was scanning for any sign that might guide her in the right direction, a man stepped in front of her path. He was tall, with an air of authority that seemed to announce his role before he could say it. His uniform confirmed it, a local police officer. He didn't offer a smile or even a courteous nod. Instead, he studied her with narrowed eyes, as though weighing whether or not she belonged in his town. "Ma'am, are you lost?" he asked, his tone suggesting that her very presence was something he found unusual, perhaps even suspicious. "No, thank you," she replied, her voice calm and warm. "I'm here on a mission, just passing through." The man's expression did not soften. He looked her up and down, lingering on the bundle in her arms. "And what's in that package you're carrying?" Saraphina held it closer to herself instinctively. "It's something for the shelter here," she answered gently, hoping her words would reassure him. "A donation to help keep it open for those who need it." The officer's eyes narrowed further. "A donation, huh?" He sounded skeptical, as if the idea of a stranger bringing aid to his town was something he found difficult to believe. "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze with an unwavering calm. "I've come a long way to help." For a moment, they stood in silence, each sizing up the other. But in Saraphina's eyes there was only sincerity and peace, while the officer's gaze was clouded with doubt. "All right," he said finally, though there was a note of warning in his voice. "Just stay out of trouble. This town doesn't take kindly to strangers stirring things up." With that, he moved away, but his suspicious glance lingered on her for another moment before he finally walked off. Saraphina felt a pang of sadness. The man's hostility seemed rooted not in anything she had done, but simply in who she was and how she appeared. However, she kept her spirits high, reminding herself that her mission transcended judgment. She was here to serve, to spread light in places shadowed by fear and doubt. Continuing down the street, she finally spotted the building she was looking for. It was modest and worn, the paint peeling in places and the windows dim, but it was unmistakably the shelter she had come to save. The moment she stepped through its doors, a wave of warmth greeted her, as did the grateful eyes of the shelter's coordinator, an elderly woman named Margaret, who had dedicated her life to helping others. "Saraphina!" Margaret called out, her voice filled with both joy and relief. "We've been waiting for you." Saraphina smiled, feeling the weight of the journey lift just a little. "I've brought what we gathered," she said, carefully handing the bundle to Margaret. "It's from everyone who believes in what you're doing here." Margaret's hands trembled as she accepted the money, her eyes misting over. "Thank you, dear. You've no idea what this means to us." As the two women shared a moment of understanding, Saraphina felt renewed in her purpose, but a nagging feeling lingered in the back of her mind, of the man who had questioned her and the unkind look in his eyes. She couldn't help but wonder if her arrival would indeed bring light to this town, or if it would stir something darker. Saraphina's faith, however, remained unshaken. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was here to face them. And as she spent the next few hours with Margaret, learning more about the people they would help, she was reminded once more why she had come. This wasn't just about money. It was about showing the world, even a small town like this one, that love and compassion knew no boundaries and that they could thrive even where they were least expected. The day began to turn into evening, and Saraphina prepared to leave. She and Margaret shared a heartfelt goodbye, and Saraphina assured her that she would be back to check on the shelter. As she stepped back out onto the quiet streets, the shadows began to lengthen and the air grew colder. She wrapped her habit tightly around herself, holding on to the warmth of Margaret's gratitude. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She looked around, catching a glimpse of the police officer from earlier, standing a few feet away, his gaze still wary, still unkind. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and then, as if trying to reassure herself, Saraphina looked away and continued on her path. But she knew that her journey in this town was far from over, and that the challenge she had come here to face was only just beginning. Saraphina's presence lingered in the back of Jake's mind long after he had watched her walk away. As a seasoned police officer in this small town, he knew almost everyone, their faces, their lives, and even their troubles. But her? She was an outsider, a figure shrouded in mystery from the very moment he had seen her. Jake's job was to keep the town safe, and strangers with unclear intentions didn't sit well with him. Back at the station, Jake found himself pacing as his unease grew. He couldn't shake the memory of her confident, calm demeanor when she spoke to him. There was a quiet strength in her that unsettled him. She hadn't seemed intimidated by his questions or his authoritative tone, which only fueled his suspicion. To him, her appearance, her way of speaking, and that bundle she held were all red flags. He considered himself an excellent judge of character, and to him she seemed too confident, too calm for someone with good intentions. It was nearing the end of his shift when he finally decided to look her up. Heading over to his desk, he logged into the department's database, searching for any record or identification of her name, her face, anything that could validate his instinct. After several attempts and finding no results, his frustration deepened. Who was she? How had she come here without any prior record? To him, this only meant one thing. She was hiding something. As the hours ticked by, Jake's thoughts began to spiral. Every time he pictured her face, it reminded him of the many cases he'd encountered where people tried to manipulate their way through with charm and composure. He couldn't ignore the feeling that she was here to deceive, to pull some kind of trick on the town. His thoughts drifted to that bundle in her hands. A donation for the shelter, she had said. But why bring such a large sum in cash? Wouldn't it have been safer to send a check or transfer the money electronically? Jake's mind raced with scenarios. Perhaps she was involved in some larger scheme, something dangerous. Perhaps she was hiding her true identity, or worse, part of a group planning to exploit the townsfolk's kindness. Just as he was reaching his breaking point, one of his colleagues, Officer Roberts, entered the station. Roberts, older and a little wiser than Jake, immediately noticed the tension in his younger colleague's expression. "Something bothering you, Jake?" Roberts asked, sitting down with a sigh. Jake hesitated, weighing whether to involve anyone else in his suspicions. "There was a woman I saw earlier. Said she was here to deliver money to the shelter, but something's not right about her." Roberts raised an eyebrow. "The woman in the nun's habit? I saw her around town, too. Seemed harmless enough." Jake scoffed. "That's just it. She seemed too harmless. Walking around with a bundle of cash like it's no big deal. Said she was here to help the shelter, but who does that without any security? No ID, no papers, nothing to prove who she is. Just showed up and expected us to take her word for it." Roberts chuckled, shaking his head. "Jake, not everyone who walks into town is up to no good. Sometimes people just want to help." Jake clenched his jaw, feeling a flash of irritation. That's the kind of thinking that lets people slip under the radar. One of these days, that kind of carelessness is going to bite this town back. Roberts sighed, sensing Jake's stubborn resolve. "Look, son, if she's still around tomorrow, you could talk to her again. But if you go charging in without any evidence, you're only going to make things worse." Jake gave a brief nod, though he didn't share Robert's ease. "Maybe, but I won't let anyone pull a fast one on us." That night, Jake's thoughts churned, keeping him awake long after he had left the station. The next morning, as he went about his patrol, his mind wandered back to the woman, her calm confidence, and the strange sense of mystery she carried with her. He knew he wouldn't be able to rest until he got to the bottom of it. As the day progressed, Jake continued his patrol, hoping to see her again. He checked by the shelter, the cafe, and even asked a few locals if they had seen her. Most shrugged, barely giving him the response he wanted. To them, she was just another face, someone passing through. But to Jake, she was a loose thread, and he couldn't let it go. By late afternoon, he finally spotted her. She was walking out of a small convenience store carrying a bag of groceries, her head still held high. He watched as she walked down the street, her movements graceful and steady, as though she felt no weight from his gaze. Jake felt his suspicion flare up again, and he quickened his pace to catch up. "Excuse me," he called out, his tone edged with authority. She stopped and turned to face him, a gentle smile gracing her features as though she hadn't expected to see him, but wasn't surprised. "Officer," she greeted politely, "is there something I can help you with?" Jake folded his arms, his gaze narrowing. I thought we'd established that I don't know who you are or what you're doing here, so I'd like you to explain yourself a bit more this time." Saraphina's gaze softened, her expression calm. "As I told you, I'm here to deliver a donation to the shelter. My community raised these funds, and it's my duty to ensure they reach those who need them most." Her words were steady, unshaken by his forceful tone, which only made Jake feel more irritated. "And what community is that? Where exactly are you from?" She held his gaze with a quiet patience. "I come from a mission community out west. We support shelters like the one here, places that often struggle to find support. I'm not here to cause trouble, officer. I'm here because I believe it's my duty." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He was trained to detect signs of evasion, and while she didn't appear to be lying, he couldn't bring himself to trust her. "So, you're just here out of the goodness of your heart?" She nodded simply. "Yes, officer, that's all." There was a flicker in her eyes, a subtle hint of sadness that made Jake pause, though he quickly brushed the thought aside. "Well, around here, we don't just take people at their word, so I'm going to need to see some identification." Saraphina hesitated, as though she had expected this but still felt a pang of disappointment. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small identification card, worn and faded from use. Jake took it, examining it carefully, though he couldn't find any reason to doubt its authenticity. Still, something in him felt unsettled. As he handed it back to her, he caught a glimpse of her hands, worn and roughened from work. It was a fleeting detail, but one that lingered with him as he looked her in the eyes again. "Why didn't you just send the money?" he demanded. "Why come all this way with cash in hand?" She took a moment before answering, her voice soft but firm. "Because it means more this way. These people deserve to see that they are cared for, that they matter enough for someone to come here personally. Money alone is not always enough. Sometimes you have to show up." Her answer struck a chord in him, though he refused to let it show. Instead, he kept his tone hard. "All right, but don't think I won't be keeping an eye on you. This town is small, and we don't take too kindly to strangers coming in and making changes without reason." Saraphina nodded. "I understand. Thank you, officer, for looking out for your town." With that, she turned and continued on her way, leaving Jake standing alone with a strange sense of unease. Despite her polite responses and calm demeanor, his suspicions remained. Her presence seemed almost too good to be true, and he wasn't ready to let it go. As he watched her disappear down the street, he felt a nagging fear that he couldn't place, a feeling that perhaps he was on the verge of something bigger than either of them realized. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, Saraphina stepped into a small, quaint cafe, hoping to find a moment of respite. The events of the day had already tested her patience, and the persistent stares from townsfolk, along with the encounter with the officer, lingered in her mind. She chose a table near the window and quietly ordered a cup of tea, trying to focus on the tranquility of the moment. But even the warm scent of tea and the peaceful hum of the cafe couldn't shake her sense of unease. Outside, Officer Jake paced the street, keeping a casual yet vigilant eye on the cafe. Ever since their last encounter, he couldn't rid himself of the feeling that Saraphina was hiding something. It wasn't just her presence in the town, or the way she carried that bundle with a near-sacred dedication. It was the way she seemed to look right through him, unafraid and unwavering. He felt his suspicions grow with each passing moment, each glimpse of her calm resolve. After a few more minutes of watching her through the cafe window, he finally made up his mind. This wasn't something he could let slide, not when so much about her story didn't add up. He straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door to the cafe. The soft bell above the door chimed, and every head in the cafe turned to him. Saraphina, however, simply looked up with a serene expression, acknowledging him with a slight nod before returning her gaze to her tea. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice a notch louder than necessary, drawing attention from the other patrons. "I need to speak with you again." Saraphina looked up, her gaze steady, giving no sign of unease or surprise. She nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Of course, officer. Please, join me." Jake hesitated for a moment, thrown off by her calmness, but quickly regained his composure. He took the seat, crossing his arms as he leaned forward. "You seem awfully calm for someone who's drawing so much attention," he began, his tone laced with suspicion. "Most people don't come waltzing into town with a bundle of cash and think they can just get away with it." Saraphina's expression remained untroubled. "I'm not here to get away with anything, officer. As I explained, I came to offer support to the local shelter. There's no hidden agenda." Jake leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "And why should I believe that? People don't just show up in a town like this, out of nowhere, with a story like yours. It doesn't sit right with me." A flicker of sadness passed through Saraphina's eyes. "I understand your caution, truly, but I'm here because I believe in what I'm doing. The people in that shelter need help, and I'm willing to offer it." Jake's jaw clenched. "And you expect me to believe that it's purely out of kindness?" "Yes," Saraphina replied, her voice gentle yet firm. "Sometimes people do things simply because it's the right thing to do." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and tense. Jake could feel the weight of the other patron's eyes on him, waiting for him to make his next move. It was as though the entire cafe had gone still, holding its breath. His gaze drifted to the bundle resting beside her on the table, and his suspicion flared. "Let me see what's in there," he demanded, gesturing toward the bundle. "If it's just money for the shelter, then you won't mind showing it to me." Saraphina's hand moved protectively over the bundle, her brow furrowing slightly. "I'm sorry, officer, but I can't let you do that. These are sacred donations from my community, entrusted to me to deliver safely." Jake felt a surge of frustration. Her refusal only confirmed his suspicions in his mind. "This is my town," he said, his voice lowering to a near growl. "I have a duty to protect the people here. So I'm not asking any more. I'm telling you, open it." Saraphina's calm began to waver, her hand gripping the bundle tighter. "Please, officer, this isn't necessary. I've done nothing wrong, and I have no ill intentions." "Then prove it," Jake shot back. He reached forward, his hand moving toward the bundle as though to take it by force. In that instant, Saraphina rose from her seat, clutching the bundle close to her chest as she tried to move past him, hoping to avoid a confrontation. But Jake wasn't having it. He quickly blocked her path, his face set in a hardened expression. The tension between them was palpable, drawing murmurs and whispers from the patrons around them. People began exchanging uneasy glances, sensing that something was about to erupt. And then, in a swift motion, Jake reached out, grabbing her arm in a tight grip. "Let go," he said, his voice a low command. "You're not going anywhere until I get to the bottom of this." Saraphina gasped at the sudden force, trying to pull her arm free, but Jake's hold only tightened. His eyes held a fierce intensity, as though he had convinced himself that she was guilty of something he couldn't yet name. "Officer, please," she said, her voice pained but steady. "You're hurting me." But Jake's mind was clouded with suspicion. a storm of distrust swirling in his thoughts. He couldn't let go, couldn't let her walk away. In his mind, she was hiding something dangerous, something that could put the town at risk. He ignored the looks from the other patrons, who were now watching with expressions of shock and disapproval. "I'm done with your games," he hissed, giving her arm a harsh tug. "You're coming with me." Saraphina's resolve was beginning to crumble under the weight of his aggression. She struggled against his hold, but he only tightened his grip, pulling her toward the door. The murmurs in the cafe grew louder, and a few people even rose from their seats, looking as though they might intervene. But no one moved. Fear and confusion held them back, trapping them in place. Just as Jake was about to drag her outside, Saraphina found her voice. "Please, officer, I'm just here to help." Her words fell on deaf ears. In his mind, there was no room for trust, only suspicion. With a final tug, he pulled her out of the cafe and onto the street, ignoring her protests and the disapproving looks from those watching. The cold, evening air stung her face as she stumbled forward, barely keeping her footing as Jake pushed her along. The shadows of the street seemed to grow darker around them, as though the very town itself was watching in silence, bearing witness to the injustice unfolding. As they reached his patrol car, Jake pushed her against the hood, his hands moving to his cuffs. "This is for your own good," he muttered, more to himself than to her, trying to justify his actions. Saraphina struggled, her voice filled with pain and confusion. "I haven't done anything wrong. Why won't you believe me?" But Jake didn't answer. He fastened the cuffs around her wrists, the cold metal biting into her skin. The action felt final, a brutal testament to his lack of faith and his unwillingness to listen. In that moment, she felt the weight of his prejudice, a force as real and unyielding as the cuffs on her wrists. The door to the patrol car opened, and he pushed her inside, ignoring her pained expression. He closed the door, leaving her sitting in silence, the echo of his suspicion hanging heavy in the air. The night seemed to close in around them, thick with a tension that neither words nor actions could dispel. As Jake climbed into the driver's seat, he cast one last look at her through the rearview mirror, his gaze hard and unyielding. To him, she was still a mystery, a threat that had to be contained. But as the engine rumbled to life and the car pulled away, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that he might be making a mistake. The streets passed by in a blur as he drove towards the station, the town bathed in the fading light of dusk. And as Saraphina sat in the back, her hands bound and her heart heavy, she felt the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on her, knowing that her journey was far from over. The air in the station was thick with tension as Jake led Saraphina inside, the cold metal of the handcuffs digging into her wrists. She felt the stares of the officers and staff as they turned their attention to the scene unfolding before them. Saraphina kept her head high, her expression calm despite the ache in her arms and the sting of humiliation. She had done nothing wrong, and she knew that if she held to her faith, the truth would come to light. Jake, however, wasn't about to let her off so easily. His grip was firm as he steered her into an empty room, ignoring the looks of surprise and unease from his colleagues. He didn't care what they thought. To him, this was necessary, a step toward getting to the bottom of who this stranger really was. He closed the door behind them, his eyes hard as he regarded her. She sat down, her wrists still bound, meeting his gaze with a quiet resilience that only seemed to fuel his irritation. "All right," Jake began, his voice cold and unyielding. "You're going to tell me everything. Right here, right now." Saraphina looked up at him, her face calm despite the situation. I've told you the truth, officer. I'm here to help the shelter. There's nothing more to it." Jake scoffed, pacing in front of her. "You expect me to believe that you just wandered into town, alone, with a bundle of cash, purely out of the goodness of your heart?" "Yes," she replied simply, her voice unwavering. "I came because it's my duty, because I believe in the work that the shelter does." Jake stopped, crossing his arms as he looked down at her. "People don't just show up in towns like this, out of nowhere, without any kind of agenda." Saraphina sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly as she shook her head. "It's not my job to convince you of my intentions, officer. My actions will speak for themselves." But Jake wasn't satisfied. He leaned closer, his voice lowering to a threatening whisper. "I don't buy it. There's something you're not telling me, and I'm going to find out what it is." The door creaked open, and Officer Roberts stepped in, his gaze shifting between Jake and Saraphina, the concern evident in his expression. "Jake, what's going on here?" he asked, his tone cautious. "You brought her in without any real cause. You sure you want to go down this road?" Jake's eyes narrowed as he looked at Roberts, his jaw tight. "She's hiding something, I know it." Roberts sighed, his gaze softening as he turned to Saraphina. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Saraphina nodded, though her wrists ached and her spirit felt weary. "I'm fine, thank you." But Jake wasn't finished. "She won't tell me what's in that bundle, says it's donations, but she refuses to show it." Roberts raised an eyebrow. "Did she break any laws?" Jake hesitated, his hands clenched at his sides. "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. People like her, they're good at hiding things." Roberts took a deep breath, considering his words carefully. "Jake, we don't have any reason to hold her here. This isn't how we do things." Jake shook his head, refusing to let it go. "I don't care. She's staying here until I get answers." Saraphina closed her eyes, murmuring a quiet prayer under her breath, asking for strength and patience. She knew that resistance would only worsen the situation, but her heart ached from the injustice she was facing. She hadn't come here to fight, only to help, yet here she was, a prisoner to suspicion and prejudice. Roberts placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, his voice low and steady. "You need to let this go. Whatever you think she's hiding, this isn't the way to find out." Jake shrugged off his hand, a storm brewing in his eyes. "No, I need to know the truth. I need to be sure." Without warning, he grabbed Saraphina's shoulder, pulling her to her feet with a force that made her wince. She stumbled slightly, the cuffs restricting her movements as Jake pulled her toward the door, ignoring her protests and Robert's attempts to stop him. "Jake!" Roberts shouted, stepping in front of him. "This has gone far enough." But Jake's face was set, his determination unyielding. "No, Roberts, this is my call." He pushed past his colleague, dragging Saraphina down the hall and into a dimly lit holding cell. As the door clanged shut behind her, she felt the weight of the cold, unforgiving metal around her wrists. The darkness of the cell closed in, amplifying her sense of isolation and helplessness. For the first time since her arrival, she felt the sting of fear. Jake lingered outside the cell, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He seemed to derive some twisted satisfaction from seeing her confined, his doubts and suspicions momentarily silenced by the sight of her behind bars. "You're going to sit here until you're ready to tell me the truth," he said, his voice laced with bitter resolve. Saraphina looked at him, her gaze filled with both sorrow and defiance. "I've already told you the truth. You're the one who refuses to listen." Jake's fists clenched, a dark fire flaring in his eyes. "Then maybe some time alone will help you remember what you're hiding." With that, he turned on his heel, leaving her alone in the darkness. The heavy door clanged shut, sealing her inside the cold, empty cell. The silence was deafening, pressing down on her from all sides. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and began to pray, her soft words echoing faintly in the stillness. Hours passed, and the world outside grew quieter as night settled over the town. Saraphina sat alone, her mind racing, her heart weighed down by the injustice of her situation. She had come here out of love and faith, but those very qualities had been met with hostility and suspicion. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but she knew that she had to remain strong. She couldn't let Jake's actions strip her of her dignity or her faith. Just when she thought she could bear the silence no longer, the door opened, and Roberts stepped inside, his face etched with concern. He walked over to her cell, looking her in the eyes. "I'm sorry about all of this," he said softly. "Jake, he's not usually like this. Something's gotten under his skin, and he's not thinking straight." Saraphina nodded, her voice calm despite the turmoil she felt. "Thank you, officer, but I believe that, in time, the truth will come to light." Roberts gave her a sad smile, admiration shining in his eyes. "You got a lot of faith, more than most people would in your situation." She returned his smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "It's what keeps me going." Roberts sighed, glancing over his shoulder to ensure they were alone. "I'm going to do what I can to help you, ma'am. This isn't right." With a nod, he turned and left, leaving her alone once more. But this time the isolation felt less oppressive. She knew that at least one person believed in her innocence, and that glimmer of hope was enough to sustain her. Outside the cell, Jake continued to pace, his mind racing as he wrestled with his doubts. Part of him knew that Roberts was right, that he had gone too far, but another part, the part driven by fear and prejudice, refused to let go. He had made his decision, and now he would see it through, no matter the cost. As dawn approached, Saraphina remained seated in her cell, her prayers a quiet whisper in the darkness, a steady flame that refused to be extinguished. She knew that her journey in this town was far from over, and that the trials she faced were only beginning. But she also knew that her faith would carry her through, guiding her toward the light, even in the face of Jake's unyielding hostility. The first light of morning crept into the cell, casting long shadows across the cold stone walls. Saraphina took a deep breath, steadying herself, preparing for whatever lay ahead. She had come to this town with a purpose, and no matter the obstacles, she would see it fulfilled. The air in the police station was still, thick with an unspoken tension. Saraphina sat in the dim light of her cell, her hands bound, her body weary but her spirit unbroken. She was waiting. Not for justice, perhaps, but for an understanding, for a glimmer of compassion that had so far been absent since she'd set foot in this town. Her wrists ached from the cold metal of the handcuffs, and her face bore the marks of a struggle she hadn't sought. The encounter with Officer Jake had been like none she had faced before. Unfounded hostility, raw and personal, driven not by her actions but by the prejudices he held. Outside, Jake paced in the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. He couldn't settle. Robert's words from the night before echoed in his mind, the older officer's doubt lingering like a splinter, festering and painful. But Jake shook it off. He had his instincts, and they had never failed him before. Something about Saraphina didn't sit right with him, and he wouldn't ignore that feeling. The sun had barely risen when the station door swung open, and the mayor, a tall, imposing figure with silver-streaked hair and a sharp gaze, entered, his eyes immediately locking onto Jake. "What in the world do you think you're doing, officer?" the mayor demanded, his voice cold and clipped. Jake turned, stiffening under the man's gaze. "Sir, Jake started, but the mayor cut him off with a gesture. "I'm here because I received a call at dawn saying you detained a nun, a visitor to this town, with no reasonable grounds," the mayor said, his voice low with controlled anger. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" Jake hesitated, his mind racing for an explanation, a justification, but the mayor wasn't interested. Without waiting for an answer, he brushed past Jake, heading straight to Saraphina's cell. As the cell door opened, Saraphina looked up, surprised to see the mayor standing there. The kindness in his eyes was like a balm on her wounded spirit, and she managed a faint smile, despite the fatigue that weighed on her. "Miss Saraphina, my sincerest apologies," the mayor said, his tone warm and respectful. "I'm appalled that you were treated in such a manner. This isn't the way we welcome visitors." "Thank you," Saraphina replied softly. "I didn't expect such hostility, but I hold no ill will." The mayor nodded, turning to Jake with a scowl. "Uncuff her, now." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't protest. He moved forward, fumbling with the keys as he released the handcuffs. As soon as her hands were free, Saraphina rubbed her wrists, but she looked at Jake with a sadness that seemed to pierce through his defenses. "Officer," she said quietly, her voice soft but unwavering, "I came here to bring support, not harm. I only wanted to help." Jake looked away, unable to meet her gaze, but he could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, heavy and inescapable. The mayor gave him a hard look before speaking again. "Jake, I suggest you take some time to reconsider your approach to your work. You represent this town, and your actions reflect on all of us," he said sternly. "I expect you to remember that." Jake nodded, his face flushed with anger and shame, though he said nothing. The mayor turned back to Saraphina, guiding her out of the cell and toward the front entrance. As they stepped outside into the early morning light, Saraphina took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs. It was a moment of freedom, of relief, but the memory of the night before clung to her, a reminder of the prejudices she still had to face. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor," she said quietly. "I'm grateful for your kindness." The mayor smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I'm truly sorry for what happened. I hope it hasn't deterred you from the work you came here to do." Saraphina nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "My purpose remains unchanged. The shelter still needs the support we've brought, and I intend to see that it gets it." The mayor's expression softened with respect. "You have my support in that, Miss Saraphina. Please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything you need." With a grateful nod, Saraphina turned and walked down the steps of the police station, her steps steady and resolute. She knew that her journey in this town was far from over, but she would face it with the same strength and compassion that had brought her here. Inside the station, Jake stood alone in the empty hallway, his mind churning with a mix of anger, shame, and confusion. He had always prided himself on his ability to protect the town, to see through deception and keep his community safe. But now, for the first time, he found himself questioning his own actions. Roberts approached him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Let it go, Jake. We all make mistakes. But maybe it's time you asked yourself why you couldn't see her for who she really is." Jake swallowed hard, unable to answer. As he looked down the hall, he felt the hollow ache of doubt beginning to eat away at his certainty. And for the first time, he wondered if the danger he'd sensed had been within himself all along. The air outside was crisp and cool as Saraphina walked away from the police station, her heart steady but heavy. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows along the quiet streets. Despite her release, the events of the previous night weighed on her like a dark shroud. She couldn't help but feel the sting of distrust, the pain of judgment inflicted upon her for no reason other than who she was. But Saraphina's purpose was clear, and she would not let the anger or fear of others deter her. The few townsfolk she passed watched her with curiosity mixed with a wary respect. News of the incident at the police station had already begun to circulate, and whispers of her unjust detainment were spreading. She could feel their stares, sense their uncertainty, but she held her head high, maintaining the grace and poise that had seen her through the darkest moments. As she approached the shelter, she saw Margaret standing outside, her face etched with worry. The older woman hurried over, wrapping Saraphina in a warm embrace. "Dear Lord, I was so worried about you," Margaret whispered, pulling back to look Saraphina in the eyes. "Are you all right?" Saraphina nodded, her expression calm. "I'm fine, Margaret. Just a misunderstanding." Margaret shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes. "A misunderstanding? The way they treated you? It's shameful. I'll be having a word with the mayor myself about this." "Thank you, but it's all right," Saraphina reassured her, placing a gentle hand on Margaret's arm. "There's still much work to do. Let's focus on what we came here to accomplish." Margaret sighed, but she nodded, a look of admiration softening her gaze. Together, they stepped into the shelter, where Saraphina could finally deliver the donation she had traveled so far to bring. The bundle, now safely in Margaret's hands, represented the collective compassion of her community, and Saraphina's heart swelled with a quiet pride. As Margaret counted the money and thanked her profusely, Saraphina felt the heaviness in her chest begin to lift. Her mission was being fulfilled, one small act of kindness at a time. She spent the day assisting at the shelter, helping serve meals, listening to stories, and sharing in laughter and companionship with the people who had come to rely on the sanctuary of this place. Despite everything, her faith in humanity was renewed with every smile, every thankful glance. But as the sun began to set, casting a warm, orange glow over the town, Saraphina felt a familiar gaze on her. She turned and saw Jake standing outside the shelter, his hands in his pockets, his posture tense and uncertain. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, neither one speaking. Then, with a deep breath, Jake stepped forward, his face shadowed with shame. "Saraphina," he began, his voice low and hesitant, I came to apologize." She regarded him calmly, her face reflecting neither anger nor resentment. "I appreciate that, officer, but I'm not the one you need to make amends with." Jake's brow furrowed, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Saraphina gestured toward the shelter, where people were gathering around tables, sharing a meal and laughter. "These are the people I came here for. They're the ones who deserve protection, care, and understanding. Your duty as an officer isn't just to keep the peace. It's to ensure that everyone, no matter who they are, is treated with respect and dignity." Jake swallowed, her words cutting deep. He looked away, shame burning his face. I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting this town." Saraphina's voice softened. "Fear can make us see things that aren't there, officer. It can blind us to the truth, but there's always a chance to see things differently, to choose compassion over judgment. Jake's shoulders slumped, and for the first time he truly looked at her, not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as a human being. Her quiet strength, her unwavering kindness left him speechless. I don't know if I can change overnight," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I want to try." A gentle smile crossed Saraphina's lips. "That's all anyone can ask, officer. Change takes time, but it starts with one choice, one moment of courage." He nodded, a tentative hope flickering in his eyes. "Thank you, Saraphina, for showing me that." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them melting away, replaced by something more profound, a shared understanding, a bridge built from empathy and humility. As Jake turned to leave, he glanced back at the shelter, at the people gathered within its walls, and he felt a strange sense of belonging, a pull toward something greater than himself. The lesson he had learned was one he would carry with him, a reminder of the power of compassion and the courage it took to confront his own biases. The sun had fully set, casting the town in a soft, peaceful darkness, and as Saraphina watched him walk away, she knew that her mission here had accomplished something far greater than she had ever expected. The days passed quietly in the town after that evening outside the shelter, yet a subtle change lingered in the air. Saraphina continued her work at the shelter, her days filled with the small but powerful acts of kindness that brought comfort to those in need. She saw the people there not just as individuals with hardships, but as part of a community, a tapestry woven together through shared stories, struggles, and resilience. Each day brought new faces and voices, and Saraphina's heart felt lighter, knowing that her mission was fulfilling something deep and meaningful. Meanwhile, Jake found himself questioning everything he thought he understood. The apology he had offered to Saraphina had been only the beginning. For the first time in his career, he felt uncertain about his place in the town, the role he played, and the way he had treated people. Saraphina's words echoed in his mind, a quiet reminder of the power of compassion over judgment. One afternoon, he found himself outside the shelter once again, unable to ignore the pull that seemed to draw him there. He lingered for a moment, watching as Saraphina greeted people, her presence a soothing force that filled the room with warmth. The laughter and conversations inside were a stark contrast to the cold, indifferent world he had often seen. Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped inside, unsure of what to expect. The sound of the door opening drew Saraphina's attention, and she looked up, her expression softening when she saw him. Without hesitation, she approached him, her smile as welcoming as ever. "Officer Jake," she greeted, her tone warm. "What brings you here?" He cleared his throat, his gaze shifting to the people in the shelter before returning to her. I thought I'd come by and see if there's anything I can do to help." Her smile widened and she nodded. "There's always something to be done here. Come, I'll show you around." Over the next few hours, Jake found himself immersed in a world he had never truly understood. He helped serve meals, listened to the stories of those who called the shelter a temporary home, and, in doing so, began to see the town through a new lens. These were people who had struggled, who had faced adversity, yet found solace in the kindness of strangers. They welcomed him without hesitation, even though they knew who he was, and for the first time, Jake felt the weight of his own misconceptions begin to lift. As he moved from task to task, he caught glimpses of Saraphina, her presence steady and compassionate, guiding him with gentle words and quiet encouragement. The patience she had shown him, the forgiveness she had offered. It was all reflected in the way she treated everyone she met. Her strength wasn't in resistance or defiance, but in her unwavering kindness, a quality that had become rare in the world he knew. During a quiet moment, Saraphina approached him, carrying 2 cups of tea. They sat together on a bench outside the shelter, the warm evening air surrounding them. "You seem different, Jake," she said softly, offering him a cup. "I see a change in you." Jake took the cup, staring into the tea, his thoughts a jumble of emotions he struggled to put into words. "I guess I just never realized how blind I'd been. I thought I knew this town, knew what was best for it. But I see now that I didn't know anything at all." Saraphina nodded, a gentle understanding in her eyes. "It's easy to fall into patterns, to see things the way we've always seen them. But it takes courage to step outside that and see the world as it truly is." He looked at her, his gaze filled with remorse. "I'm sorry for everything I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it." She reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've already begun to make amends, Jake. Sometimes the greatest apology is in the actions we take to make things right." Her words settled over him, a balm to the guilt he had carried. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting the town in a warm, golden glow. Jake looked over at her, a question that had been on his mind finally rising to the surface. "Why did you come here, Saraphina? Why risk everything to help people you didn't even know?" She smiled, her gaze thoughtful. "Because I believe that kindness is a duty we all share. It's easy to love those who are close to us, who understand us, but true compassion lies in helping those who are strangers to us, those who may never know our names or repay our kindness. This town needed help, and I was in a position to give it." He nodded, her words resonating deeply within him. He thought of his own life, the years he had spent guarding himself, building walls of suspicion and distrust, and, for the first time, he saw how hollow it had been. As night deepened, Jake rose, a newfound determination settling over him. "Thank you, Saraphina, for everything you've shown me." She inclined her head, a warm smile gracing her features. "The journey doesn't end here, Jake. It's just the beginning. Remember, every day is an opportunity to choose kindness." With a final nod, Jake walked away from the shelter, a changed man. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could shape the future. The lessons he had learned from Saraphina would stay with him, guiding him to make choices that reflected the values he had once overlooked. Over the weeks that followed, Jake continued to visit the shelter, volunteering his time, listening to the stories of those who came seeking solace. The townsfolk noticed the change in him, saw the warmth in his eyes that had been absent before. Slowly, the barriers he had built around himself began to dissolve, replaced by a genuine desire to understand and help those around him. And Saraphina, having fulfilled her mission, prepared to leave the town. The shelter was thriving, its doors open wide to welcome those in need, and her heart swelled with pride at the difference they had made. On the day of her departure, the townsfolk gathered to bid her farewell, their faces filled with gratitude and admiration. Jake stood among them, a quiet smile on his face as he watched her prepare to leave. When she approached him, he took her hand, his gaze steady and filled with respect. "Thank you, Saraphina," he said simply, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've shown me a path I never would have found on my own." She squeezed his hand, her smile warm and knowing. "Remember, Jake, compassion is the greatest strength we possess. May you continue to walk this path with an open heart." With a final goodbye, Saraphina left the town, her presence leaving an indelible mark on the lives she had touched. And, as Jake watched her go, he felt a peace settle over him, a quiet understanding that he had been given a second chance to be the kind of man he had always aspired to be. In the end, Saraphina's mission had been more than just about the shelter. It had been about planting a seed of compassion and understanding in the heart of a town that had forgotten its true values. And Jake, now a guardian of those values, would carry her lessons forward, ensuring that her legacy lived on in every act of kindness, every choice to look beyond fear and see the humanity in others. As he turned to walk back to the shelter, he knew that his journey was only just beginning, and he would honor the path that Saraphina had set him upon with every step he took. In the weeks following Saraphina's departure, a quiet transformation began to take hold in the town. Her presence lingered in the hearts of those she had touched, not as a fleeting memory but as a profound and lasting influence. The lessons she had shared, the kindness she had shown, and the courage with which she had faced prejudice had left an indelible mark. And nowhere was this change more visible than in Officer Jake. Jake's daily visits to the shelter had become routine, but they were far more than a simple habit. Each visit felt like an opportunity to continue Saraphina's work, to reach deeper into himself and bring compassion to others in ways he had never before considered. The townsfolk, who had once seen him as a hard, even severe figure, began to view him in a new light. Gone was the hardened suspicion in his eyes, replaced with a softer, more open expression. One morning, Jake was at the shelter, helping Margaret organize supplies for the day. As they worked side by side, Margaret watched him with a gentle smile. "You know, Jake," she began, her voice warm, "I never thought I'd see you here, let alone see you so invested in the people who come through these doors." Jake paused, glancing over at her. "I never thought I'd be here either, Margaret. But Saraphina, she opened my eyes to things I'd ignored my whole life. I guess you could say I'm trying to make up for lost time." Margaret nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "She changed more than just you, Jake. She reminded this town of the power of compassion, and that's something we all needed to see." Jake considered her words, feeling a surge of gratitude for the woman who had shown him the path he was now walking. He had always believed his duty was to protect the town from external threats, but Saraphina had taught him that the greatest threats often came from within: fear, prejudice, and the unwillingness to understand others. And in learning that, he had found a purpose deeper than any badge could bestow. As the day progressed, Jake continued his work at the shelter, greeting people as they came and went, each face a reminder of the resilience and strength that Saraphina had shown him. He listened to their stories, offered help where he could, and found that the simple act of being present, of listening without judgment, had a profound impact not only on them, but on himself. In the town, the change was palpable. Inspired by Saraphina's example and by Jake's transformation, others began to open their hearts and minds. Neighbors who had once been strangers started connecting, reaching out to offer support and companionship. The shelter, once seen as a place of last resort, became a gathering point, a symbol of unity and compassion for the town. One day, as Jake was leaving the shelter, a young boy approached him, holding a small, handmade card. "Officer Jake, can you give this to Miss Saraphina?" the boy asked, looking up at him with earnest eyes. Jake knelt down, accepting the card with a soft smile. "I'll make sure she gets it," he promised, though he wasn't sure if he would ever see Saraphina again. The card was simple, a heartfelt drawing of a shelter filled with smiling people. Inside, the boy had written, "Thank you for making our town a kinder place." Jake felt a lump form in his throat as he read the message, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. That evening, he returned home and placed the card on his desk, a small but powerful reminder of the journey he had embarked on. In that moment, he knew that Saraphina's legacy would live on, not only in the shelter, but in every act of kindness he chose to carry forward. Months passed, and Jake continued to grow into his new role, not only as an officer, but as a compassionate leader within the town. He helped organize community events, initiated programs to support the shelter, and even started a mentorship program for young people, hoping to instill in them the values that Saraphina had shown him. One evening, as Jake walked through the town, he paused outside the shelter, watching as the lights flickered warmly from within. The sound of laughter and conversation spilled out into the quiet street, a comforting reminder of all that had been achieved. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that Saraphina's influence would live on in every choice he made, in every life he touched. As he looked up at the night sky, he whispered a quiet thanks, a promise to honor the path she had shown him. And though she was no longer there, Jake knew that her spirit was with him, guiding him, reminding him that the journey of compassion was one that never truly ended. In that moment, he felt a peace unlike any he had ever known, a contentment that came not from recognition or pride, but from the quiet, steady work of building a kinder, more understanding world. And he knew, as he walked away from the shelter, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you think. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on the channel. There are many more exciting stories to come. See you soon.